Before we talk about stock charts, recessions, or boom and bust cycles, I want you to imagine something very different. Picture the late 1300s in North Africa. No spreadsheets, no central banks, no economic models. Just caravans crossing the Sahara, cities rising and falling along trade routes, dynasties struggling to hold power, and scholars try to make sense of why societies seem to flourish and then decay. Now here's the surprising part. In that world, long before Adam Smith, long before modern economics had a name, one thinker sat down and asked a question that still haunts finance today. Why do economies rise, peak, and collapse in patterns that feel almost predictable? His name was Ibn Khaldun, and if you've never heard of him, you're not alone. But once you understand what he saw, and more importantly, why he saw it, you'll realize he wasn't just writing history. He was quietly inventing the logic of economic cycles. Ibn Khaldun didn't start as an economist. That word didn't even exist yet. He was a judge, a diplomat, a political insider who lived through coups, exiles, and the sudden collapse of ruling families. He watched empires rise on discipline and solidarity, then rot from the inside once success made them complacent. And instead of blaming fate or divine whim, he looked for incentives, pressures, and patterns. That mindset is what makes him feel shockingly modern. In the opening pages of his most famous work, Muqaddimah, Ibn Khaldun lays out a radical idea for his time. Societies follow laws, just like nature does. Human behavior isn't random. When people face certain economic conditions, they tend to respond in consistent ways. When incentives change, behavior changes. And when behavior changes at scale, entire economies shift. Think about how bold that is in a medieval context. Most historians before him focused on rulers, battles, and dates. Ibn Khaldun zoomed out. He asked what happens before the collapse. What changes in daily life? In taxes? In work ethic? In how people relate to power? And he noticed something unsettling. Prosperity often plants the seeds of decline. At the beginning of a dynasty, he observed people are usually tough, disciplined, and cooperative. Resources are scarce, so waste is punished naturally. Leaders tax lightly because they need people to produce. The economy grows not because of luxury, but because survival demands efficiency. Does that sound familiar? Over time, success changes incentives. As wealth increases, rulers expand courts, armies, and bureaucracies. Taxes rise to support a more comfortable lifestyle. Productive people start to feel squeezed. Innovation slows. Risk-taking declines. And the very structures that once supported growth begin to drain it. Ibn Khaldun wasn't moralizing here. He wasn't saying people become bad. He was saying people respond rationally to comfort and security. When survival pressure disappears, discipline weakens. When the state becomes predatory, productive activity shifts or shrinks. It's not a failure of character. It's a shift in incentives. That's the core idea that quietly turns his work into economic theory. What makes this even more impressive is where he got his data. Not abstract models, but lived experience. He served multiple dynasties across North Africa and the Islamic world. He saw governments at their strongest and weakest points. He negotiated with rulers who were desperate to extract revenue from shrinking economies. He watched as overtaxation drove merchants away, shrinking the tax base further. A feedback loop any modern economist would recognize. And he didn't claim certainty. In places where historians still debate his conclusions today, Ibn Khaldun himself often framed them as tendencies, not laws. Patterns, not prophecies. That humility is part of why his work has aged so well. What's fascinating is how little technology matters in his framework. Whether the economy runs on agriculture, trade caravans, or early manufacturing, the cycle looks eerily similar. Growth driven by necessity. Stability turning into comfort. Comfort breeding excess. Excess triggering decline. Then renewal, often from the margins, from groups still hardened by scarcity. So as we go deeper into his ideas, keep this question in mind. If a 14th century scholar could identify economic cycles without charts, GDP, or data dashboards, What does that say about how deeply rooted these patterns are in human behavior? And more provocatively, are we really as different as we think? When Ibn Khaldun talks about cycles, he isn't imagining a neat circle you can draw on a whiteboard. He's describing something messier and more human. How a society's success changes the way people behave, and how those behavior shifts change the economy. The engine of his story is incentives. What people get rewarded for, what they get punished for, and what starts to feel worth it over time. One of his most famous ideas is Asabiyyah, often translated as group solidarity or social cohesion. It's not just team spirit. It's the glue that makes people show up, cooperate, share risk, and defend a common project. In Ibn Khaldun's world, the groups with strong Asabiyyah were often on the margins. Tribal groups, frontier communities, people living closer to scarcity than comfort. Life forced them to be disciplined, to trust each other, and to move fast when conditions changed. That matters for finance because economies don't grow just because resources exist. They grow because people coordinate, specialize, trade, and keep promises. A merchant ships goods because he expects contracts to hold. A farmer plants because he expects he can keep enough of the harvest to make it worth the effort. A craftsperson trains for years because she expects demand, stability, and some protection from arbitrary confiscation. The soft stuff, trust, enforcement, norms, quietly becomes the hard stuff: output, trade, tax revenue. So in Ibn Khaldun's cycle, a new ruling group with strong Asabiyyah often takes power and builds a state. In the early phase, the rulers tend to live closer to their people. They can't afford to squeeze too hard because they still depend on broad support and real production. Taxes are lighter, administration is simpler, and there's a stronger sense of shared fate. That's when economic activity expands. People work, trade picks up, cities get safer, roads become more reliable, and markets start to feel predictable. Not perfect, but predictable enough to invest. Then something sneaky happens. Prosperity changes the ruler's problem. At the beginning, the challenge is survival and legitimacy. Later, the challenge becomes maintenance. A growing state develops a court, a bureaucracy, a military payroll, a big lifestyle, and a bigger appetite. Success creates commitments, and commitments require revenue. Revenue pushes the state toward more taxation, more control, more extraction. Ibn Khaldun pays close attention to this because he lived inside it. He watched courts expand. He watched officials multiply. He watched rulers lean on taxes because taxes were the easiest lever to pull in the short term. And he noticed a pattern that feels very familiar if you've ever seen a business try to fix falling profits by raising prices while ignoring customer churn. In the early stage, modest taxes can actually increase total revenue because economic activity is growing. People are producing more, trade is lively, and the tax base is expanding. But as the state's needs grow, taxes often rise beyond what the economy can comfortably carry. Productive people don't always revolt dramatically. Sometimes they just quietly change behavior. Merchants reroute. Farmers reduce output. Skilled workers leave cities. Informal markets grow. Corruption becomes a service fee to survive the system. The tax base starts to shrink, and then the state raises taxes again to compensate, which shrinks the base further. Doesn't that sound like the early stages of a downturn? Not because of a single bad event, but because the system's incentives are now misaligned with production. Ibn Khaldun also ties this to the psychology of comfort. A ruling group that started with tough habits and shared sacrifice gradually becomes used to luxury. The next generation grows up inside palaces rather than tents, so to speak. They inherit power without inheriting the hardship that forged discipline. Meanwhile, the people who do the hard work, farmers, artisans, traders, feel the pressure of rising costs and uncertainty. In his telling, the state becomes less like a partner in order and more like a competitor for resources. And here's where his cycle feels almost like a finance narrative. The boom contains the seeds of the bust. When times are good, it's easy to build expensive structures, literal and institutional. Big administrations, big armies, big social expectations. But when revenue slows, those structures don't shrink easily. The fixed costs remain. The state becomes desperate to sustain the appearance of strength. That desperation can lead to more extraction, more short-term decisions, and more fragile legitimacy. In modern terms, it's like a company that loads up on recurring expenses during peak revenue, then panics when growth slows and starts making decisions that damage the core product. Ibn Khaldun even has a surprisingly clear view on why cities become economic powerhouses. He emphasizes how urban life supports specialization. When lots of people live close together, they can divide labor. Crafts become more advanced. Services multiply. Productivity rises. That's one reason cities attract wealth and talent. But that same concentration also attracts taxation and political competition, which can turn the city's strength into vulnerability. Now let's make this concrete with a little story that fits his logic. Imagine a dynasty takes over a region with important trade routes and a few growing cities. In the early years, the ruler keeps taxes relatively light because stability is still fragile, and he wants merchants to choose his roads over someone else's. Traders respond quickly. Caravans increase. Markets flourish. With more trade, there's more employment, porters, guards, craftsmen, food vendors, everyone. The state collects steady revenue simply because the economy is expanding. The ruler looks wise. The people feel the benefits. It feels like a growth era. Then the court grows. The ruler wants a grander palace, more officials, a larger army to secure borders and project strength. None of these are evil in isolation. They're rational from the ruler's point of view. But the bill arrives. Taxes rise. New tolls appear. Officials start selling exceptions. Merchants begin comparing routes again, the same way businesses compare supply chains. Some of them decide the risk is no longer worth it. Trade volume slows. The city feels it first. Fewer goods, fewer jobs, less buzz. Revenue drops. The ruler assumes the answer is higher taxes because what else is there? But higher taxes push more activity away. The economy becomes less legible and more informal. Corruption rises because rules are burdensome and survival finds shortcuts. The ruler now needs an even larger enforcement apparatus, which costs more, which requires more revenue. And suddenly, what looked like a stable system becomes a loop. Not overnight collapse, but a gradual tightening that drains the productive base. At that point, Ibn Khaldun would say the dynasty is vulnerable. Not because destiny demands it, but because the system's incentives have shifted. The group in power no longer has the same cohesion and discipline. The people no longer feel the same shared project. The economy no longer rewards productive effort as reliably. And somewhere at the edges, a tougher group with stronger Asabiyyah is watching, learning, and waiting. This is where this cycle becomes more than politics. It's a theory of how wealth and institutions interact. Wealth can fund stability, but it can also fund complacency. Institutions can protect markets, but they can also become expensive machines that feed on the markets. And the whole time, individuals are responding rationally to what's in front of them. If you want a relatable version, think of it like managing your personal finances when life gets easier. When money is tight, you track everything. You're disciplined. You avoid waste. Then income rises and suddenly subscriptions multiply. Spending becomes automatic and your lifestyle quietly locks in. If something changes, job loss, emergency, inflation, your fixed costs don't care. You feel squeezed. You start making short-term moves. You might even borrow to keep appearances. That's not because you're a villain. It's because comfort changed your incentives and your habits didn't adjust until pressure forced them to. Ibn Khaldun is telling that story at the level of entire societies. And the big takeaway isn't luxury is bad or taxes are always bad. His point is more analytical. When a system rewards production, stability grows. When a system rewards extraction, the productive base shrinks. When cohesion is strong, institutions feel lighter. When cohesion weakens, institutions get heavier and more costly. And if that imbalance runs long enough, the cycle turns. So the next time you hear the phrase economic cycle, it might be worth asking, what if the real cycle isn't just numbers rising and falling, but incentives shifting under the surface, changing what people are willing to build, risk, and sustain? And this is the moment where the camera pulls back. Because once you've followed Ibn Khaldun's logic all the way through, you start to realize he wasn't just describing medieval dynasties. He was describing a pattern that shows up anywhere humans build systems, governments, companies, communities, even families. Whenever a group wins stability, the incentives shift. And when incentives shift, behavior shifts. And when behavior shifts at scale, the numbers follow. If you take nothing else from this video, take this. Ibn Khaldun is basically telling you that the economy isn't a separate machine humming in the background. It's people making choices in response to pressure, reward, and risk. The market is not a mood. It's a mirror. That's why his cycle doesn't feel like a dusty history lesson. It feels like a cautionary tale with receipts. Early on, life is hard, so cooperation is valuable. Work matters. Trust matters. Keeping your word matters. You don't have the luxury of waste, so you build habits that look boring but create real strength. Then success arrives, and success is intoxicating. It makes you feel like the rules that got you here are optional now. It convinces you that you're special, that you deserve a softer life. And I'm not judging. Who doesn't want that? But success also relaxes the very muscles that kept you strong. And if you're running a society, that's where the trouble begins. Because prosperity doesn't just buy comfort. It buys commitments. Bigger payrolls, bigger expectations, bigger institutions, bigger lifestyles. And once people get used to bigger, shrinking feels like humiliation, not adjustment. So instead of cutting costs, the system starts reaching for the easiest lever it has, extraction. Take a little more. Tighten the grip. Add a fee here, a toll there, a process everywhere. The machine gets heavier, and the people doing the actual producing feel it first. So here's a question you can sit with. How many economic downturns begin as a moral problem? Not morality like preaching, morality like incentives. Like, what does a system reward when it's winning? Does it reward value creation? Or does it reward clever extraction? Does it reward building? Or does it reward controlling? Does it reward discipline? Or does it reward appearance? Ibn Khaldun would probably say, watch what gets rewarded, and you'll see the future. Now, I promise you a statement that's going to make some people uncomfortable. So here it is, clean, simple, and yes, controversial. Most societies don't get destroyed by their enemies. They get destroyed by their own success. Not by poverty, not by lack of talent, not because the people suddenly become stupid, but because success changes incentives so quietly that the system doesn't realize it's eating its own foundation until the floor starts to creak. And that's uncomfortable because it means the villain isn't always out there. Sometimes the villain is comfort. Sometimes it's we'll deal with it later. Sometimes it's the belief that the boom is proof of permanent superiority. Sometimes it's the slow creep of systems that begin as protection and end as burdens. If you've ever worked in a place that started scrappy and hungry, then later got bloated and bureaucratic, you already know this story. In the beginning, everyone pulls weight. People solve problems fast. Decisions are clear. Then the organization gets successful, and suddenly you need 5 approvals to do what one person used to do in an afternoon. Meetings multiply. Middle layers appear. People learn that politics is safer than productivity, and the best performers quietly ask themselves, wait, why am I working so hard if the rewards don't match the effort anymore? That's Ibn Khaldun in modern clothing. Not politics, just incentives. And to be fair, historians do debate how universally his cycle applies. Real history isn't a perfect loop. Sometimes dynasties adapt. Sometimes institutions reform. Sometimes a shock, disease, climate shifts, trade disruptions, hits at the worst moment and accelerates decline. Ibn Khaldun himself lived through the Black Death's aftermath, and that alone should remind us that not every downturn is earned by bad choices. Life throws wild cards. But what he's saying is that even with wild cards, systems that stay disciplined and aligned with production tend to survive better than systems that become heavy, extractive, and complacent. So if you're watching this as a finance-minded person, here's the real takeaway. Economic cycles aren't just about when the line goes down. They're about when the incentives underneath the line start drifting. When trust erodes, risk goes up. When rules become arbitrary, investment slows. When producers feel punished, production shrinks or relocates. When extraction becomes the main strategy, the base weakens. And when the base weakens, the system gets desperate, and desperation creates bad decisions. That's the cycle. Not mystical, not magical, human. And here's the weird comfort in it. If cycles are driven by incentives and behavior, then they're not completely out of our hands. At the personal level, you can build your own version of Asabiyyah, your habits, your network, your discipline, so you're not relying on perfect conditions to be okay. At the business level, you can protect the productive core and keep the system light enough to breathe. At the community level, you can notice when things shift from building to extracting, and you can push back early, before the creaking becomes cracking. Because the tragedy Ibn Khaldun keeps pointing to his timing. Decline doesn't start when people are desperate. It starts when people are comfortable enough to ignore small warning signs. It starts when you can still afford denial. So let me ask you something, and I genuinely want you to answer in the comments. Where have you seen this pattern play out in real life? Have you seen a business, a workplace, a community, even a family situation that started strong and cooperative, then slowly drifted into comfort, complexity, and frustration? Have you ever watched rules multiply while results shrink? Or felt that moment where it became harder to do the work, then harder to talk about the work? What did it look like? What were the first signs? Drop your story below. Keep it respectful, but be honest. I read the comments, and I'll reply. And if your story sparks a really interesting thread, I'll reach out there too, because I want this channel to feel like a conversation, not a lecture. We're all trying to understand how the world works, and sometimes the best insights don't come from textbooks. They come from patterns people have lived through. And as we close, just picture Ibn Khaldun again. A man watching cities swell, courts expand, trade surge, then the slow tightening that turns prosperity into pressure. He didn't have modern charts. He didn't have quarterly reports. But he had something that still matters more than any dashboard. The ability to look past appearances and ask, what incentives are shaping this system right now? Because if you can answer that question, you're not just studying history. You're reading the early chapters of the next cycle.